Hey guys, and welcome back to another video. So kind of to start off right away, I'm gonna ask you guys, what are your favorite characters? And I mean like these could be characters from games, it could be from animes, it could be from cartoon shows, dramas, what else is there? There's like a whole bunch, I guess like your own OCs from books, from stories, from your childhood, whatever. But what are your favorite characters? Because I'm gonna take you guys along with me to draw 3 of my favorite characters. Now, I had a hard time narrowing this down to about, I think it's 5 characters that I ended up drawing, but I'm gonna be only showing you guys really 3 in this video. So there was a recent art trend, or it's not so recent at this point. I think it's like well over a month old, but it's recent enough for me because typically I don't like joining art trends too much. I know a lot of them are fun, but I'm so behind on, I don't know if it's just like making the art or just like participating, or by the time it gets to me it's been a while since I've even like seen the trend. Hence, like, I think the last one I did, which was like the Apple trend, where people would draw people's like side profiles kind of facing each other and it makes up like the apple core, which I found very cool and neat, but I usually don't jump onto the bandwagon of these like too often. But this one kind of relates back to like your favorite characters represent you in a way, or you see yourself in your favorite characters. That's probably a better way of phrasing it. So basically, I'm going to be drawing 3 of my favorite characters for the art trend that I think people call just like the Sienna drawing trend. I'm not too sure if there's like a specific name for it, but you guys can let me know who your favorite characters are. At least for me, I did have a hard time narrowing down what I would consider like to be my favorite characters. And like I mentioned, I ended up only doing, I think, about half of the duration of what people typically use the song for this particular drawing challenge. So I ended up only drawing 5 characters, but I definitely could have fit a lot more characters if I didn't want to narrow it down. So starting off, we're starting with Sugawara Koshi from Haikyuu. So Haikyuu, even just like that series alone, I had a hard time figuring out who I wanted to draw for my favorites. I've always mentioned this in the past whenever I talked about Haikyuu and having to pick a favorite. Suga has always been pretty much my top pick. I feel like he's in contention with Tobio as well as Oikawa and Kenma, but I just like a lot of the setters in Haikyuu for some reason, so I like to say majority of them are my favorite. I also like to include Yaku from Nekoma because I think he's super adorable and I really like him as well. But I ended up drawing Suga first because I think it was a little bit easier for me to pick some sort of Haikyuu character to be one of my favorites for this particular trend. And then the other ones, I feel like one was like a no-brainer for me, but then trying to narrow it down to only 5 characters did make it a little bit harder and kind of like, in a way, reflect on what I would consider like a favorite character. Because I don't know, my brain kind of separates characters a little bit. I don't know if it's also because like the artist brain takes over a little bit versus like just pure entertainment and enjoyment. So there's a lot of characters or even just character designs that I enjoy drawing a lot and you might think are my favorite characters because I draw them a lot, but that might not be the case. Sometimes I have characters that like I really like, but I feel more intimidated to draw them because I feel like I might not do them justice. So it kind of goes both ways, that I might not like a character. Let's say like character A versus character B. I might like character A's design more than B, so I end up drawing character A more, though I think character B might be more of my favorite. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. So I don't think there's like a definitive answer, other than the next character that I'll draw after Suga, I think is like a very obvious one for me at least. But throughout like just consuming media or like games that have a lot of characters, like gacha games, my favorites do kind of like go in and out a lot of the times. I do have some that are very much like definitive since the very start of me consuming that said medium or media. But like kind of in general, saying favorite sounds a little bit too concrete in a way. I I was having a bit of a hard time trying to think like, do I like this character to the point where I would consider them my favorite? So there's a lot of like even like ensemble star characters that I was potentially going to pick. I was gonna draw Hiro for today as well, but I ended up not. But then I was like, do I like Hiro more than Tsukasa, or do I like drawing Hiro more than Tsukasa? But I like Tsukasa more. And then I was thinking like, oh, Tears of Femus, I do like Luke and I like Artem. But then that's kind of like the same thing. Do I like them as characters, or do I like them just purely out of like aesthetics? And I think there's nothing wrong with like liking a character purely for aesthetics, but I wanted to pick ones that, because maybe the whole intention of the drawing trend seems to be more like the characters kind of reflect parts of you in a way, right? Which I'm kind of interested from. I'll show you kind of like the snippet of the entire drawing meme trend thing at the very end, that you guys can tell me whether or not you think you have a grasp on what kind of characters I typically like, or what you think maybe those characters say about me. I'm not too sure if it's gonna say much, or if there's even any sort of like consistency or rhyme or reason. But enough of that. Let's talk a little bit about drawing process, because as you can see, I am doing line art today. So I went through a little bit of a roller coaster after I did that other Albin drawing video I think I did last week. I think it was last Wednesday to be exact, where I was trying to experiment with drawing Albin, but I was like determined to do line art. Then I ended up scrapping it and then trying to do painterly stuff, and then scrapping it, went back to line art and almost crashed out at the very end. But I think I know the reason why I am a little bit more harder on myself when it comes to like stuff like line art. I definitely think it has to come down mostly with the fact of, one, the process, but then two, my expectations are a little bit too grand for what I know would to be my skill level, I guess. So because of that, I did approach like today's drawing session for all three characters very loose and kind of just more simple, and I had a lot more fun working on them because of this. And I think also I knew kind of like the look that I wanted for the end result was going to be more minimalistic compared to adding like a bunch of colors and then deciding whether or not I want to go with like painterly coloring, or if I want to go like cell shading or combination of both. So while I was working on Suga, I was kind of like picking out the process of what I wanted to do. So I ended up sticking with a very monochromatic kind of looking color palette. I did make the base of the characters very much like a light pale yellow, almost white, but I didn't want to use like a very stark white. I wanted to have like a tinge of like warmth to it. And then for my grays, I also ended up not going super monochromatic into like grayscale per se. I went with something more akin with like a purple tinge so that it can stand out from our very, very light yellow, but also just to give it a little bit of color somewhere. So I actually had a lot of fun working on this and just playing around for the most part. And I don't think I struggled as much with the line art, despite what I thought would be my preference. So while I was working on this, like these drawings for today, I had a very similar feeling to when I used to work in Paint Tool Sci. And Paint Tool Sci was kind of like my starting point to my very first art program that I drew in the most. And that definitely stemmed a lot of like my actual drawing habits. So I had a very particular sketching brush, one for line art, one for like my flats and just like painting and coloring. So I knew that I was the type that wanted to have kind of like one brush for each particular step. It kind of transferred when I ended up doing stuff in Clipsio Paint a little bit, a lot. So I guess like in Procreate, I do this because I have a very dedicated sketching brush, a painting brush, and a rendering brush, and I kind of just usually use those three, if anything. So luckily for me, while I was working on these ones, like I mentioned, it kind of gave me the same feeling to when I used to work in Paint Tool Sci, which made the process feeling a little bit more nostalgic, but also like very comfortable. Now I'll jump back into that. I actually did a sketch version of this drawing trend that I was going to do, but I ended up not really liking them, so I ended up just doing this particular one where you see me do the line art and the monochromatic look. But yeah, I was just more in a sketchy mood at the time of working on that one, not liking the results, so I put it off for another week and a half, and then now here we are working on our second character. So before I go off on too much of a tangent, I feel like the second character is like 100%. I know he's one of my favorite characters, just like flat out, right out of the gate. This is going to be Dan Heng PT or Dan Heng Permancer Terre. Terre? I don't know how to say it. I always butcher the name. But this particular Dan Heng is my favorite. I knew from the beginning of like Honkai Star Rail, I would like Dan Heng as a character in general, both like visually and like personality wise. So I'm just glad that, you know, other forms of Dan Heng I still like equally, or if not more, than the original version. So I'm going to be working on him while I kind of switch back to rambling about the idea, about my frustration, and why I feel like I enjoyed the process of working on line art more right here versus the one where I had like almost a crash out last week. So number one thing for me for line art, I think, is definitely intention and result is something that I feel like makes me struggle the most, because process-wise or like physically doing the task, I know I can do line art and I know I can finish line art, I can use the line art, but something is just always not perfect or something is just off with the line art. So I end up scrapping it before I finish coloring, or while I'm doing the coloring process, I end up thinking the line art is hindering more than helping. And I don't think I've also talked about the reason why I want to get back into doing line art, because I kind of want to find the middle ground between how I work in Procreate and how I used to work in Paint Tool SAI. So having line art gives you a lot of flexibility about being able to isolate certain parts and like have colored sections where they're clearly defined, I feel like. But for me, I found it very restrictive because I was not used to doing overpainting or even doing coloring on top of my line art. So let's say after I finished an illustration, if I wanted to adjust anything, I would have to adjust the line art, then fix my flats, and then fix my shading and my coloring. But nowadays, if I find something is wrong or off, or I want to change something a little bit, I will just make a new layer on top of everything and do overpainting on top to make the adjustment. And I do find that coloring with sections and utilizing line art does make the process a lot faster. And I think it's also because I've realized while working on Procreate, I've been working a lot longer, which in turn I don't think is making the result of the illustration better per se. So I'm making my time too long for very mediocre results back, if that makes sense. So I feel like there's a weird area where I should be able to speed up my process without like sacrificing the quality in a way. And I know a lot of that is me cleaning up like my stray lines or having these sketchier lines not being super clear and having to fix that later on while I'm doing the painting portion. Now, I know for a fact that part of that is also just like my mentality of being like, oh, I can paint that later, so I'm not going to sketch it out fully right now because I can fix it later. And I should probably just take more time focusing on making my sketch a little bit more detailed so that I'm a little less lost while working on the painting portion. So I know that's one factor. But the other thing is the fact that part of me doesn't like the fact that I used to be so comfortable using line art just to end up hating it in a way. Because like I mentioned, I know I can do line art, and in general, if I don't think about it, line art is very therapeutic in its own way. Being able to do line weight variation, I like doing like the longer, smoother strokes if I can, if you use like a high stabilization. And for the most part, I feel like even if I use a stabilization that is fairly high and very strong, almost like pretty much max for stabilization, I can still work pretty quickly. So I know it wasn't too much of like a time sink in my opinion. But I feel like this is just like a long-winded way of saying that having a more clearer sketch for me to follow for my line art is one of my problems. So like I mentioned, sometimes when I'm doing like the painting portion, I will make myself fix it because I will fix it during the painting portion. And I kind of do the same thing with line art. And so sometimes I will sketch something and I'll be like, oh, because I have to redraw it in line art anyways, I can actually do a more finalized version with the line art. But in turn, I don't think I have a very good grasp on what I'm trying to draw, so I will end up just, you know, really hating the line arting phase because I didn't give myself clear instructions right off the get-go. The second thing, oh, okay, one more tangent. We finished Dan Heng, so I am going to be moving on to our third character, which he turns out a little derpy, but I think it's okay. He still came out like pretty cute. And this character I've liked so much at the very beginning that they made me play this particular game, which I feel like has had such a big impact, wink wink nudge nudge, in just like my drawing journey, as well as just like games in general, or even like the people I talked to more recently, because this is kind of like a bonding point to a certain extent. And I really do like all the characters in this game. So I am drawing Venti for our third character. Venti's color scheme and just like demeanor and just character in general really wanted me to play Genshin, and this is like my first time playing a mobile game, a gacha game nonetheless. And even though I ended up not getting him by the time his banner ended, I was like determined to play the game so that when he does come back, and he did, I will be able to get him in the end. So yeah, I was very motivated by Venti in a way, so I wanted to make sure that he was included into this little art trend. Now, back to line art as a topic. And I apologize that this video is going to be so scatterbrained, but also like super rambly. But line art, I do find that when I'm doing a more like final illustration where I do want to have like more of that painterly look, I should have thinner line work that's more detailed in a way. And oftentimes, especially when I was working in Painful Sai, or like my previous styles when I used to draw when I was younger, had much more thicker lines. And you can see even the lines that I'm using today are actually quite much more on like the thicker side of line art. I know a lot of artists who use like super thin line art. And for me, when I worked on like this piece of Albin, when I did like another sketch page, I'll put on the screen right here. Hopefully I'll remember. Alongside with the piece that I did of Clara more recently, I used a much larger canvas. I'm talking about at least 5,000 pixels as the shortest side. And then the biggest side will be whatever is the proportioning that I had. So I think for Clara, hers might have been like 5,000 by 5,000. And then for Albin, the short side I believe was like about 5,000. So I did find that thinner lines made me less focused on the fact that I had a lot of line art present. But for something like the Venti drawing that I'm working on right now, I feel like the slightly thicker lines are a little bit more better for something a little bit more graphic, or if you want to have a lot more focus towards the outlines or line width variation or the contrast of lines and your colors, then I do think the thicker lines just fits a little bit better. But even when I'm doing painting over my lines, whenever I'm doing like color adjustments, or I want to fix like a part of an illustration but I ended up finished like the line art, the coloring, effects and stuff, I definitely find it easier to be able to almost like match the style back up with the line art if my line art is thinner. So I'm gonna try my best to keep these in mind, because these are just like problems that I personally have with line art. I don't think it's particularly going to be as helpful towards other people, because it seems like more of a personal issue that I have with line art, while some people might have just like troubles with maybe you have shakier hands, so maybe you're not getting the strokes or the lines up to the quality that you want, or maybe you haven't found that right texture for your brush, or I don't know what else there could be. I guess like understanding line width variation. Do you want to add it in later? Do you want to add it in like as you go? So kind of more like traditional medium, where some people might have like a dip pen where you can kind of flex the nib to get your thick and thin lines all together. But I think the more I work with line art, I will eventually have a more concrete answer and hopefully find like a good middle ground. I definitely like a textured brush for line art, so I definitely use something like that for these ones as well. But I think that's it for today's video. So we have Suga, we have Dan Heng PT, and we have Venti, and right after this I'll show you guys this part, which is going to be matched up with the audio for probably a future short, as well as it will be on my Instagram as well. So yeah, I just don't want to have the copyrighted music on the end of the video, so you can just kind of imagine. So we had Suga, we have Dan Heng, we have Venti. I ended up drawing Natsume, and then I drew Marcus from Reverse 1999. And that's it for today's video. I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye!